The quizzes are, there's a variety of ways to use the quizzes, but they're really intended to be something that you want graded in the system and you want kind of control. So many of you, if you've attended the Keep Teaching with Brightspace training already, you're familiar with creating assignments or using announcements as a way to provide, announcements as a way to provide information to students, content, adding materials and handouts as a way to provide information to students, and then maybe you're familiar with assignments, which is a way for students to submit things to Brightspace. So like if they wrote a paper, they wrote a paragraph for you to grade. Quizzes are, it's kind of like taking a test online where everything's going to be graded for the most part automatically, and it gives you an opportunity to have students take that and it not be a burden on you to have to go through and grade each thing individually. So let's go ahead and share my screen. And I'm going to minimize our video here. And I'm going to use a course. There's a couple of different ways that you can create quizzes. I'm going to start from content, but the majority of the time I'm going to actually be spending in the quizzes tool. So the quizzes tool lives under assessments in this drop down here called quizzes. But anything I add to content, like if in this example, I'm on my content page in one of my courses, and I've created a module called quizzes, because let's say I want to put all of them together. Any quiz I build in here using upload, create, new quiz, when I create it here, it's going to also show up in my quizzes tool. It's kind of like the back end access to all of my quizzes. So I'm going to start by creating it from content, but then the rest of the time, and when we go to look at really in-depth into settings, I'm going to actually access it from the quizzes tool. So I just want to clarify those two approaches, because up until this point, especially if you're new with Brightspace, you may have only seen things being created from content and haven't spent much time in the tool itself. So I'm going to first start with creating a quiz right from here. Oh, I'll back up for a second because there was a question. What I'm going to show you first is creating a quiz right in Brightspace. So if you have a Word document with all your questions, all your tests built out, what I'm going to show you is actually manually creating all of those quizzes basically with a copy-paste technique. So you're copying or you're building them right into Brightspace. There are tools that I'm going to talk about at the end if you do have a lot of quizzes that are all in Word and you want to just import them into Brightspace. Brightspace doesn't actually have a way to convert your Word document into something Brightspace can read. So you can't just import a Word document and it turn into a Brightspace quiz. However, there's tools out, there's other schools that have developed tools, which I'll show you at the end, where it can do that for you. So there's a test generator, that's what they're typically called. There's a school, Algonquin University, I think, who's created one that I really like, that can basically, you paste all the questions from a Word document, you set them up in a specific way, and then you export it from there, you download a file from there, and that file Brightspace can read, and it can convert it for you. But the first step I'm gonna walk through is just a simple, I know I want to put something up on Brightspace right now, and I'm going to do it freehand or copy and pasting from a quiz. So where I'm going to begin is, again, right now I'm going to begin from content, but then later I'm going to go straight to the quizzing tool, and I'm going to show you how to start a quiz from either place. So I'm going to click on Upload, Create, and choose New Quiz. On this screen, I'm just going to give it a name. So in this case, I'm going to call this quiz, I'm going to call it a reading quiz because I already have a quiz one in this. Reading quiz. Right now I'm going to keep it hidden from users because I'm still building it. I don't want them to see it yet, even though they technically wouldn't start it until it's time. But I'm going to keep it hidden. And then these instructions here can be something like, you will have 15 minutes to complete this quiz. So clearly this quiz is a short one that I'm going to set up. Let's say like a 5-question quiz. I'm going to click Save, and it's going to take me to this new view here. And again, this is building it from content. So the majority of my work is going to be spent here in the quiz setup, but before I do that, because I'm building it from content, I want to set up a couple more things from here. And that's really the grade item, because I'm used to that practice of connecting everything to the gradebook right away. So I'm going to click on add a grade item, and I don't yet have a gradebook item for this reading quiz. So I'm going to click plus, and I'm going to call it the reading quiz. And I already know that this is a 5-question quiz, so I'm going to change my point value to 5 and click create and then save. So now, if I go, if I were to click back onto content and into my quizzes module, I'd see my reading quiz. So let's do that. Click on content. I'd see my reading quiz there that I built, but there's nothing in it. So if I click back on that title, it's going to take me right back to the same page where I can click on quiz setup. When I click on quiz setup, this is the view that I see in the tool here, which I'm going to go to in a second. This is where I'm going to see all of my questions and all of my settings. Hold on. Sorry about that. So I'm going to pause here. I'm going to leave content now because I'm going to go straight to the quizzes tool to show you the management from that side. So very similar to this page that I'm on, we're going to get back to this page by clicking on the quizzes tool. So here in the quizzes tool, you can see 3 quizzes in my list. This is the one I just created. And these other 2 that you're seeing here, I already had in this test. In this class that I'm working in. So you can see in this quizzes tool, it's again a really easy way. I can start a new quiz right from here. So I don't have to just build from content. I can build quizzes out here in this tool and then post those in content later if I wanted to. So it's depending on where you like to build, which will determine how you're going to build these quizzes. But something I like to do, if I know I'm going to build out a whole bunch at once, I might just start at this quizzes tool and do all my building from here. And then when I'm ready, I might click back into content. And instead of upload create, I would use existing activities to pull in a quiz that I already built in the quizzing tool by selecting quizzes from existing activities, and it's going to show me a list of all the quizzes that I have available to post here in content. So you can do it either way you like. If you like to start in content, it's going to show up automatically in the quizzes tool. If you like to build from the quizzes tool, it won't show up automatically in content, but you can post it in content using existing activities. I'm going to pause there for a second and see if I lost anyone. I'm just going to check the chat.
Yes, I'm sorry. Can you go back one more time? Because I missed a few minutes, like I was with could you go back to content, how did you get to quiz? You just put it in the add module, you put quiz?
So Ivana, I am recording this so you can rewatch it.
Great, thank you.
Just like we did in the Keep Teaching, I built it initially from upload, create, new quiz, but I'll let you rewatch the video, okay? Okay. Let me just check the chat one more time.
Thank you so much, thank you.
You're welcome. Are the tools different from assessment versus content? So content, the tools aren't different. If I create a quiz here, it's the same tool. It's using the same thing that I would have created from the tool itself. It's just Brightspace developed a way to kind of make it easier to get things into content. So you can start there by just putting a name and instructions there, and technically you have your shell of a quiz. But a lot of teachers aren't yet, when they're building out quizzes, they're not thinking about where in content they're going to be posting that. So they might just build straight from the quizzing tool and decide later where they want it. Even more teachers, there's other teachers that don't use content at all. Like they use content just for materials and handouts and things. But when they want students to submit assignments, quizzes, or discussions, they tell their students to go to the tool themselves, because students can access the same view that I'm looking at, except that they can only see the quizzes that I've made available to them. So that's the kind of the difference. It's all dependent on how you're comfortable using this tool. So now I'm going to go into this. The reading quiz is the one that I created, and you can see there's a couple of icons here that are, these visual icons help you determine whether or not you've done the thing that you want to do appropriately. So in this reading quiz that I created in content, the first icon I'm seeing is this eye with a line through it. That's telling me that it's hidden from students. So that's good because I'm still working on building it out. This second icon is telling me that it's connected to the gradebook. And that's what I did on that first step when I was adding the assessment piece to it in content. Those two things are useful visual indicators for me to know that I've done the things that I may want to have done. You can see the difference in this other quiz that I have down here. This new written response quiz doesn't have an eye with a line through it. That means students can see it if I haven't set other start and end dates on it. And you'll notice I don't have the little grade item icon down here, so that quiz is not connected to the gradebook. We'll walk through all of those steps of how you connect. I want you to see how icons are different here. In this first quiz that I have on here, it has very similar icons to my reading quiz, except this middle icon is telling me that special access is required. So these are other settings that when we get into the building of the quiz, I'll show you. These are settings that you can set if like you have a student who requires extra time through the DAC office or whatever it might be. You can set every student has all the same access except a special student gets extra time. You can set that in the quiz as well. So we'll look at all of those settings as we get in. So now that I'm on this page, I'm going to go ahead and edit that reading quiz that I had started. So if I click on the drop-down arrow and then click the edit button, it'll take me back to that view where I was, where I had kind of started and didn't finish building my questions. So let's go down the settings. The first is we need a name for our quiz. We built that already. I can edit the name here if I wanted to. The second is category. Now this is misleading. Some instructors believe this category is the category in the gradebook. If they're using a weighted gradebook, they think, oh, this should be the quizzes category. This category here is only for the quizzes tool. So that category is, let me see if I have categories in here. So none of my quizzes are in a category, but it basically can group your quizzes. So even, let's say you're using quizzes for homework and you're using quizzes for exams, the tool itself. You can have a category called homework where it'll group the quizzes up here that are homework. And then you have a section for, tests. And that kind of groups these into two different areas. So you can see it looks similar to this. Let's say current quizzes is a category. This is, Brightspace did this by default. These are my current quizzes because they're technically available now. They haven't ended. They're not in the past. Whereas this separate quiz down here is in the past. It's already ended. Students can't access it anymore. And it puts it into a different kind of semi-category. So that's what the category on this main page is. It has nothing to do with grades. So you do not need a category. It's just if you wanted to group together the quizzes into different categories, but it doesn't have anything to do with the gradebook. The quiz questions, we're going to spend a good chunk of time in here building out those questions. And then once we're finished building out the questions, we're going to come back to this page so that we can go through all the rest of the settings that are on this page, as well as all the rest of the settings that are here. And in Brightspace, they use tabs. And so all of these tabs mean something, and you may want to use them for your class. Okay, so I'm going to actually just jump into adding the questions to this test. I'm not worried about the settings yet because I need questions in here to then worry about the settings. So I'm going to click Add Edit Questions. Now, there's a new quiz view and an old quiz view. Right now, I'm looking at the old quiz view, but if I click on this little drop-down arrow, it's going to tell me a new quiz building experience is available, and I can turn it on or leave it off, and eventually this is going to be turned on for everyone, but right now it's every instructor has the choice. I'm just going to quickly leave it off for a second while I show you the difference. To add a new question, I click New, and I have a list of all the different question types that I can add. And we'll talk about these question types in a minute. If I switch to the new quiz building experience, the page looks just a little bit cleaner. But I have the same two options. Instead of new, it's add, new question, and then all the different types of questions I can add. So the views are very similar, and it's essentially dependent on how you like to look at this. If you like the newer view, eventually the newer view is going to take over the older view. So that's just something to keep in mind. There's also something on the site called import, where it says you can upload a file, browse question library, or import from a learning repository. Now, I'm going to warn you again, this upload a file does not mean you can upload a Word document and it'll convert it into a Brightspace test. That's not how Brightspace works. However, and I wonder if the options are on here, if I were to click on that, it will give you an Excel file that you can download and put your questions appropriately in the Excel file, and then upload that, or I should say CSV file, but it's essentially an Excel file that's saved as a CSV file. And then you can upload that, so I will say that you can certainly use that, but at the end of this training, I'm also going to show you an easier way, if your document is already in Word, to build that outside of Brightspace and then upload the file, import the file differently. So that's a really important distinction for upload a file. You cannot just upload a Word document. So let's start building. I'm just going to build a quick 5-question test so I can show you the different types of questions. So I'm going to click New Question, and the first one I'm going to do a true-false. So a true-false question we all know, very well. This might be something like or Italy is in Europe. So I have my statement here, and then you select what the correct answer is. So in this case, this answer is true, and so I'm going to choose the right answer. There's a couple of other settings that you may have missed. When I click on this, I get the full, essentially the HTML editor options that I get anywhere else in Brightspace. So I can format, I can use, the bold, italicized, underline. I can insert a picture if I wanted to. So let's say I also have a picture of Europe, and along with this picture that Italy is in Europe. Or let's say I'm a art teacher and I'm saying, the artist of this image, and so you upload the image of an artist or an artist's work or whatever, and you say the artist is XYZ, whoever it is, and then true, false. Same could be said for multiple choice. You can also insert other files in here if you want them to read something and then answer to the question. You can add a YouTube video and they can answer the question, but this is on one specific question. So there's a lot of different options in here. If you're a math instructor, you can also add graphical equations or chemistry equations, any of these things, and they work kind of similarly. I'm going to do one as an example. So this is just a graphical equation, and let's say it's a fraction, and they need to, they need to tell me what the right answer is. So I'm going to say 2/3 plus 4/5 equals, and I don't know what my equal sign is, so I'm just going to use it on my keyboard. And I have no idea. So luckily this one's going to be false. I'm just throwing out words. So you can insert even a mathematical equation in there and determine, oh, that's actually false. Let's say it was just the math, and you select what the right answer is. So there's a lot of different options when you're adding the question in here. And this isn't just for true, false questions. I'm just using this true, false question as the example. You also have some options in here. So if I click on these options drop down, there's the option to add feedback. So that's if they got the question right, I can add feedback. If they got the question wrong, I can add feedback. Now, this feedback is dependent on you setting something else up when you edit the test. So we're going to talk about that later. You can add a hint, which is if students are struggling with this, you can say, you know, you can add some kind of a hint to each of those. You can also add a short description if you needed to. That really doesn't make any sense here. But you can add enumeration as well, which is if I wanted the answer. So this is more for multiple choice. If I wanted the answers to show up as A, B, C, D, with that lettering, I would choose enumeration. But for a true false, I don't need A, B. I can also change how many points each question is worth. So in here, let's say my multiple choice question is only worth 1, but later on when I'm building maybe a written response question or a harder question, I might make those questions worth 2 points. And then you click, there's some options for clicking save. So I built my first question, and now I can either click save, which will take me back to the page where I was building questions. I can click save and new, which will save this question and start another true false question. Or I can choose save and copy, which will save this question, create another true false question with my same text in there, so I can just edit that text. And what that's helpful for is if you're using a lot of the same multiple choice options, so it wouldn't really work for true false, but if you've got a question that has a lot of the same multiple choice questions, but the question itself changes, save and copy can save you a lot of time as you're building that. So now I'm going to click save, and it'll show my new question and how many points it's worth, and I can click on that to edit it again. Let's talk about another type of question. So this is, again, I'm building the test right from scratch. So multiple choice, we all know what that means. That's essentially a question and then A, B, C, D. And we'll quickly look at that, but I'm not going to create one here. Again, you have the question text, and then these are your answer options. If I have less than 3 options, I can use this little X to remove some of those options. If I have more than 3, I can add answer using this blue. Let's say I have A, B, C, D, E, and I can use this blue link here to add more options. Once I have the correct answer, I'm going to check that off. It also lets me choose here if I want to randomize the answers for each student. So this lets me, if I have, you know, this is rainbows, and this is Toyotas, and this is happy. Whatever these answer options are, it'll randomize them for each student. So every student has a different set. The only thing I would warn is don't use none of, like if you're using none of the above as one of your options, don't randomize the answers, because then this might show up here and it won't make sense to students, because then they might say, well, none of the above, does that mean just the ones that are above that? So be really careful about that. If you're using randomized answers for each student, be careful if you're using like a none of the above option. I'm just gonna go back to my Toyota. Again, I have very similar options here. And on the right-hand side, it will show me what that question looks like. So I don't have, what kind of car is a Camry? Here we go. Toyota works there. And so over on the right-hand side, I can see how that question is going to appear to students. So then I can click save again. I can do this very similarly if I had a Word document with all of my questions on it. So if I had a Word document with all my questions on it, I can do this in a very similar fashion where I would copy the text. If I'm doing, let's say, another multiple choice, copy the text, and then copy the answer options if I didn't want to type it all out. And I'd recommend removing those letterings, the A, B, C, D that come in, because if you randomize it, those letters will be a part of it, but to add the enumeration. So it lets you can have a Word document and copy and paste at the same time. It's just later on at the end of this session when I'll talk about ways that you could import a Word document, that might save you more time than having to copy and paste one at a time. I'm going to cancel this one so we can talk about a couple other question types. Multi-select is it's the choose all that apply. So it's those questions where you say, all of the following are states in the United States. and you have a list of states, and they can check off each one that applies, like each one that is part of the US, and they just don't check off the ones that aren't. So that's multi-select, very similar to multiple choice, but they can choose more than one when you have that kind of question set up. Written response is a type of question that it's like an essay type question. So students can write their response using a written response, but it's one of the ones in Brightspace that can't be automatically graded. So if you use a written response, the system will score that. If you set up for the system to score that test automatically, it'll score it as a 0 until you're able to go in and grade that test itself. So that's written response. It essentially is just an open field. So the question might be like a paragraph of like, you know, write your thoughts on Napoleon's domination in, you know, in France and whenever he dominated, whenever he was ruling France. And then they have to write blah, blah, blah about Napoleon. And you can see over on the right how that's going to look. They're just going to get a text field like this where they type in their answer. So that's the written response. I would also recommend with the written response that you enable the HTML editor, which lets them include these options here where they can insert, they can use bold. Here, I'll stretch this out. They can format their language. Why isn't this? Well, I can't do it here. They can, let go. They have all the options to bold their work, and they'll see it in a larger image. But enabling the HTML editor gives your students more flexibility to like format their work than they would if you just gave them the text box without this enabled. And then we'll click save again. I do want to talk about some of the other questions, but I'm just going to pause a minute to make sure that there's nothing in the chat that I missed. Okay, so let's talk about a couple of the other quiz questions. And there was a question in the chat about how to grade written response. I will talk about that, yes. Short answer and fill in the blank are very similar. One might think short answer is like written response, but just a shorter written response. It's not. It's kind of like fill in the blank. So those two options, let's do a short answer just so you can see how that looks. So this might be, the sun is considered a, and the answer is going to be star. Students won't see star. That's the answer. So students see it like this, and then they would type in the word star. So that short answer, it's not meant to be, if you use it as a shorter written response, you're going to have to manually grade it, versus if it's like a 1-word, 2-word phrase that they fit kind of like a fill in the blank, then the system can grade it automatically. So that's short answer. Multi-short answer is if you have multiple fields for those blanks, like the sun is a star and it's this many miles away, and the this many is your other short answer, and you can put that in. That's very similar to a fill in the blank, where if I show you that view, is I don't need a title here, I don't need a description, but here it would be the same thing. The sun is a, and I might put this underscore here, and then my blank is star, and the weight is 100%. And I'm going to choose, because it's basically, I'm not going to have multiple blanks in this example. And I'm going to choose case insensitive because I don't care if they put a capital S or a lowercase s, I still want it to be graded correctly. And then I'm going to remove this text number 2 because it's just going to be one fill in the blank. And the way that looks, will it show me on the right? I'll have to show you when we go into it. And then I'm going to click save. So that's very similar. These fill in the blank and short answer are very similar. Fill in the blank can get really advanced. I'm not going to go into that much detail. Let me just see if there's other ones. You can also do, I'm not going to build these right now, but you can do matching where you set up like they choose one matches with A, and you have you know, 5 or 6 different things that you're trying to match with each other. It can also do ordering, where you put the presidents in the order in which that they were president, a question like that they can select the order. You can also do arithmetic questions like the ones we showed you in the beginning. And then significant figures. This is, I think, another more advanced. I think there's an instructor that's using this in the nursing department that's very advanced, and I don't understand it yet, so I'm not going to go through that. So here, your test can be however many questions, however many types of questions, it's up to you. But the ones that it can't grade automatically is written response for sure, and depending on how you do a short answer, it may not be able to grade that automatically. But everything else it can grade automatically because you put the answers in the system. Once you're finished building this test, you would click back to settings for the reading quiz. And it takes you back to this, our properties tab, where we've built out all of those questions. So my test is now 6 points because I made my true false, my first true false, 2 points. Let's say that was a mistake. I didn't need to do that. I can choose this edit values button right next to add edit questions. And I can change that to a 1. So that will reset this so that it's going to be out of 5 points. And I'm going to click save. And now all of my points add up to 5. There's a couple of settings now that appear, now that I've built my questions, is I can choose how many questions per page I want. If I don't do anything here, it's going to be all my questions on one page. And that's why you see a 1 next to these. That's telling you they're all showing up on page 1. If I wanted each question to be on its own page, I would type in a 1 here and click apply. That will change this to now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Each question is on its own page, and this thick blue line tells you that they're each on their own page. There's no other way to really know that they're each on their own page, because the next time I come back here, this will be cleared out, and this is the only indicator I have that tells me that they're each on their own page. But if I want to go back, I'm going to switch this to say 5 questions per page, so all my questions end up on the same page again. You can also choose, if you're doing 1 question per page, you can prohibit backtracking, which means once I've answered question 1 and I've moved to question 2, I can't go back to question 1. If all your questions are on the same page, this won't do anything because they're all on the same page, so they can clearly change their answers whenever they need to. This option here lets you shuffle the questions at the quiz level. So while we were in one of the questions, I showed you how you can shuffle the answers, but this lets you shuffle the whole test, which means each student gets a different 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Like student 2 might see question 2 first, and student 3 might see question 4 first. So doing this also helps so each student gets a different test, a different version of it. When I scroll down, we have a description and we have an introduction. The description shows up, I think, right before they take the test, and the introduction shows up at the top of their test, but these question marks that you'll see throughout Brightspace will kind of give you more information on where those things show up. But you can play with the descriptions and introductions. The page header and footers, if you want some information at the top and at the bottom, you don't need to worry about the page header and footer for the most part. And then in the optional advanced properties, if you had set up hints in those questions, you have to check this box that says allow hints. Otherwise, it won't show them to students. If you want, while students are taking the test, you want to disable right click, which means they can't right click and print out the test or whatever, you can choose to disable right click while they're in the test. They can't right click on anything. Right click is different than left click. Right click is usually what opens an extra menu. So some instructors like to keep that, that checked. This last option, I don't typically recommend checking, but it's based on your preference. If you turn that option on, students can't access the email tool or instant messaging tool inside of Brightspace. So that's these tools up here, and they can't email their instructor, they can't email other students. The reason why I don't always recommend using that is because sometimes, especially if you have a quiz that you're giving them a few days to do, and they're allowed to come out and finish it. You know, they have a few days to do it. You're going to be locking them out of those tools, and they won't know why, because all they get is a message when they try to email someone that they're not authorized. So as much as you can, don't use this. It doesn't prohibit them from opening another tab and going to their email outside of Brightspace. So just keep that in mind. It's not my favorite option. This notification email is if you want to get an email every time a student submits their quiz. I don't know about you, but I don't like to get that many emails, but you certainly can put your email address in here and you'll get an email every time the student submits to this quiz. Moving forward, now we're going to scroll all the way to the top and we're going to go to the Restrictions tab. The Restrictions tab is where you set up start and end date, where you make it available to students, and where you set timing on the quiz. It's where you can also set a password, and it's where you can also set unique restrictions. So if you, like that special access that I was telling you about, if some students need more time than others. So first is we have this check marked hide from users. As long as it's hidden from users, students can't see this at all. And even if I set a start date of tomorrow, if I kept this check tomorrow at that start date, they still can't see it. So a good rule of thumb is if I know I'm setting a start date, that I uncheck this hide from users and I set the start date for when I want them to be able to take it. There is a difference in that if there's a start date, so it starts tomorrow, my students can still see it. They just can't access it until tomorrow. They can't click on it and start it until tomorrow. If I don't want them seeing it, period, then I would hide it from users, but then I have to remember to come back in and unhide it from users. So that's why I recommend using the start and end dates as your control and not this hide from users. Also, this hide from users, if you hide it completely, some of these other things that we set up, really just the submission views, they won't be able to access again because you essentially made it disappear for the users. So just keep that in mind. Hide from users is really if you just don't, you're not using that quiz that semester and you don't want them to see it at all. So the due date is you can set when that's due. So let's say, and that's too far away, let's say my test is due Friday and I'm going to give them till 11 p.m. Now the due date doesn't control students being able to access it or submit it after that due date. So if you do want to control that, you would use an end date for that. If students do submit after this because you didn't set an end date, it'll show up for you as late. So that helps you, you can still keep it open and still let students submit to it, because in this flexible time and unorthodox time we're in, students may just not be able to complete it when we thought they were going to complete it. And instead of me having to keep going in and making it available, I'd much rather keep it open, have the due date. And if they submit it after the due date, I know how to control. I know how to, give them less points or whatever. So the start date is when students can actually start taking that test. So if that's tomorrow, I would make sure that I set both the start time and end time. So in this case, I want it to start at midnight that night or like 12:30 in the morning. Not that anyone's going to take it then, but that's when it's going to become visible to students. And then it's going to be due on Friday. The end date is when I'm going to say students can no longer open that quiz to take it. So if I set that end date as the same time as the due date, then students can't access it once the due date has passed. They can't take it after the due date. Whereas if I didn't set an end date, or if I set an end date in the future, students can still take it past the due date, but it'd be marked as late for you as the instructor to know. Okay, automatically the due date will show up in the calendar. If you also want the start and end date to show up in the calendar, you can check this box. And so all three, the due date, start date, and end date will show up in the calendar. I'm not going to talk about release conditions right now, but down here in these optional advanced restrictions is where you can set a password. So this is going to be challenging in our times right now. I don't recommend setting a password, but if you were in class and like you took your students all to the computer lab and you wanted them all to take the test in that computer lab, you might set a password that you only give to them while you're standing in front of them in the computer lab. So then students at home can't also take the test. But in this case, if you set up a password, you're going to have to give that password to students. So it's up to you how you want to, I don't think many of you will be using the password during this time. We're not going to talk about the IP restriction because it won't matter anyways in these times. Everyone's at home, so that restriction doesn't affect you. The timing is super important. If this is where you would set a timer on the quiz. So the first option is a recommended time limit, which you can set. Let's say I want my students to complete this in 30 minutes, but if they take longer, it's okay and I don't care. I would do that. So this is, I'm telling them that it should take them 30 minutes, but they may take longer and that's fine. If it's an enforced time limit, that means they only get however much time you give them, they only get the 30 minutes to take that test, and then something else is going to happen. So they're either going to be stopped from the test, or I have some other options that I'll tell you in a minute. This is more restrictive, but it is, if you want to time that for them, it lets you restrict that. So the time limit you put in here is 30 minutes. And then the grace period is, it gives them a little bit more time after that 30 minutes has passed. So some instructors might, if they wanted a 30-minute test, they can change this to 25 minutes with a 5-minute grace period, or they can keep it 30 minutes with a 5-minute grace period, or they can change that grace period to 1. It's up to you. But that's what that grace period means, is basically once the time period's up, they still get some grace to submit it. The options underneath that for the timing is the first one is to allow the student to continue working. So this kind of defeats the purpose of an enforced time limit, in that so that once the time runs out, they're still allowed to keep working and it doesn't matter. The second option is likely the ones that most people will choose, which is to prevent the student from making further changes. What that does is it doesn't freeze their screen, but they no longer can choose answers. They can no longer answer the questions, and they'll get a little message saying your time has run out, you need to submit the test. And then they have to go and manually submit the test. It won't submit it on behalf of them, but it doesn't let them do anything but submit. And then the last option, which is really rigid and restrictive, and I don't really recommend using it, is that it allows the student to continue working after that time has passed, but it will automatically give the students a score of 0. I don't know why. So that's like the meanest setting, I think. So most people use the prevent student from making further changes if they're using an enforced time limit. Below that is the special access. So this is where you can set for students who need extra time, or if you want certain students only to see this test. Let me explain the two differences. So this first option allows selected users special access. You use this first option if 1 or 2 students need more time on the test because of DAC circumstances. So this would allow me to just choose the 2 students who need that special time and what special settings that they need. The second option is to allow only users with special access to see this quiz, is really only a circumstance if, like, let's say you were doing everything in class and this one student has been sick all year. It's not in our circumstance right now, but let's say a student, we're still face-to-face and this one student has been sick all year and you want to put a test up on Brightspace for that student only, and you don't want any of the other students to see it, you would use this option to allow only users with the special access to see the quiz. So the first one is the one that you'd use most often for like DAC circumstances. And to add those users, you click on the box that said add users to special access. And this is where you would change the timing. So maybe the due date, start date, end date is all the same, but the enforced time limit, instead of being 30 minutes, they get time and a half. So this would be 45 minutes. And I can assign an alternate grace period if I wanted to. And I can assign a different behavior after the limit passes if I wanted to. But in this case, I just need to give them time and a half. Every other setting stays the same. And then I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to find the student that gets those special circumstances. This would be a list of all of your students. I only have 1 student in this class as an example. And then I would click add special access, and it would show me at the bottom my special student, the time that they get, and any other settings that have set up, and I can edit it or remove it from here as well. So those are the restrictions. Let's go to the third tab. I know this quiz training is going to go longer than we had expected. I'll get to let me move into assessments, and then we'll move into submission views, and then we'll get to questions. Hopefully you guys can stay a little bit longer. If not, I totally understand, and we can maybe extend the next quizzes training. On the assessment tab is where you set whether or not it gets marked as graded upon completion, and whether or not you want that being sent to the gradebook. So this first option, I always recommend checking, is to allow the attempt to be set as graded immediately upon completion. What does that mean? If I don't check that box and the student hits submit, they don't see anything other than thanks for submitting. They don't see what their score is, even if it's an automatically graded test. They don't see anything. Also, me as a teacher has to go in and manually essentially publish each of those scores so students see it. No one wants to do that. So there's some circumstances, and that's why it's here, that teachers would want to do that. But for the most part, you always want to check that box. Then underneath that, this is where you would attach it to a grade item. So this quiz I've already attached when I was building it from content, but if I hadn't, if I was building it from scratch from the quizzes tool, I may not have a grade item in here. So I would create that grade item right on the fly, just like I did earlier. So by clicking add a grade item, same name, give the same point value, and then click create. The last thing you want to do is you have to check this box in order for it to actually be sent from quizzes to the gradebook. So if I just uncheck this and it's set that it's connected to a grade item, but I didn't check this box, the scores still won't make it to the gradebook unless I manually publish them from quizzes. So these three settings are the settings that you always want to set on every quiz that you create. Otherwise, you're just like, where did their grade? I don't understand where their grades went. There's a couple more options down below that you can give them multiple attempts. So typically the default is if they're taking a quiz, they get to take that quiz once, and then I collect the score, and that's it. And they can see their score, I can see their score, and that's it. But let's say it's one of those where you want to give them 2 or 3 attempts because you know, it's for practice, and you want to, the overall grade is going to be the highest attempt that they got, or an average of all attempts. So in that case, I can change the attempts allowed to 1 to unlimited, you know, depending on how I'm using this test. I mean, so typically 2 to unlimited, really, if I wanted them to be able to take it more than once. In this case, I'm going to leave it as 1, but this is where I'd also choose, if I have multiple attempts, do I want to give them their score is going to be the highest attempt that they get, or is it going to be an average of all the attempts, or is it going to be their first attempt, is it going to be their last attempt? All of those options you can choose, but I'm going to keep it as just 1 attempt that they get. Those are the 3 main tabs of quizzes. The last tab that many instructors are now starting to understand that they probably want to learn more about is the submission views. So I'm going to quickly talk about submission views, and then we'll get to the individual questions that were in the chat. The submission views are twofold. One is, what do students see as soon as they hit submit? And then the second one is, what can I show my students after the test is over? Can I show my students what they got wrong, what they got right, all the right answers, all of that? By default, if I were to have created this test as I did, and the students take it, what they see as soon as they click submit is just the score. That's the default view. And if I click on default view, it's going to show me down here that no questions are being shown, and that they can see the attempt score and overall attempt score. So they can basically see they got 100%. If as soon as they submit, I want them to see more than that. Like if as soon as they submit, I want them to see the ones they got wrong, but maybe not what the right answers are, then I would choose something else in that default view. If I want them to see their score right away, but then I want them to, but then after the due date, I want to show them everything, I would create an additional view for that. So again, as soon as they submit, they're going to see the percent, but I can add an additional view, which I can name this, you know, all questions and answers. I don't need a message here, but the view restrictions let me say, okay, I know this quiz is due on Friday, so then on Saturday, after everyone has taken it, and I'm not going to allow anyone else to take it, I'm going to let students be able to see everything. So here, I'm going to choose under show questions, I'm going to say, yes, I want them to see the questions, and then I can choose what I want them to see. This first option is that they can see only the questions that they got wrong. The second option is they can see only the questions that they got right, but they won't see the questions they got wrong. This third option is shows all of the questions, but none of my responses. So I'm basically looking at the test, right, without how I responded or whether or not I got them right or wrong. This last option is to show all the questions with the user responses. So this would show me every question and how I responded to it, and how I responded to it. That's typically, if you want to show all questions and answers, that's the first one you would choose, is show all questions with user responses. And then the second option you would choose is show question answers. This is going to show them all the questions, how they responded, and what the right answer was. Sometimes sometimes instructors don't want them to see what the question was. This option here is to show the question score and out of score, which means for each question they can see if they got it right or wrong without you showing the question answers. So if you didn't want to show them all the correct answers, but you show them whether or not they got it right or wrong, like with a little number next to each question, this would give them everything that they needed to study from without giving them all the right answers. So there's all different ways, like a variety of ways to use these submission views. And then these other options I'm not really going to talk about. You don't need to show statistics to students. You can if you want, and that shows them how they compare to other students. But this submission view is the only, you have to set this up in order for students to be able to see which ones they got right or wrong. Anything more than just the percentage. You have to mess with the submission view. So either editing the default or creating an extra submission view. Okay. I'm not going to talk about the report setup right now, but let's pause here because I just want to get a sense of if people can stay. I'm going to continue, and I'll continue recording this so I can send it out after the training. But if people can stay, I'm going to continue, which I'd say probably about a half an hour. I originally wanted this to be an hour and a half training, but they told me not to do that. So if you can stay, please feel free. If not, I'm going to pause here and answer some specific questions. I did want to go through in the next 30 minutes how to preview this quiz as a student, how the student submissions come through, what that looks like, and how students view those submissions. So all of those things I will cover in this recording before I send that out to you. But I'll pause for a moment while, if people do need to leave, they can leave. And if there's questions that I can answer before you leave, I want to be able to do that. Is someone on the mic? Yeah.
So I'm going to leave because I'm going to participate in the engagement session, but just real quickly. So, you know, as you may know, Standout has the exams that you can get from Exam View, and you can then download it as a Word document. So, but a lot of those questions have, you know, they may have graphs, or, I mean, they have images, right? So essentially, the example that you showed where you pulled up your Word document and in the quiz, you're essentially saying I can just cut and paste into. There's no easy way with Standout, like Standout as a, you know, the National Geographic, the publisher doesn't have something that's compatible with Brightspace.
Sure. So an alternate could be, and I've seen this before for people who are just not ready to get started with quizzes for whatever reason, is you can post the Word document as a test under content, just as a document, and then use just an assignment with a text submission and have them just write their answers. So them going down the text submission, doing 1A, 2C, 3C. And you do have to manually grade that, but it still means that they can take a test without it being a Brightspace quiz.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, that's how I have it set up right now, where they're going to have to download it. But I mean, the nice thing about this quiz tool in Brightspace is that it automatically grades it. And so I'm just trying to find, is there a way where, say, instead of creating actual questions, can I then just go into the quiz tool and ask students to essentially look at their quiz and just maybe put in their answers? Does that make sense? So a lot of the I can do just multiple choice and then just have it, and so that Brightspace can automatically grade it.
Technically you can, but you're going to have to put something in. So you're going to create a test with like a multiple choice question, and you're going to you're going to put a 1 in there, and then you're going to put A, B, C, D without any of the other information. And you choose the correct answer, and then you'd have them basically with their Word document, they go in and answer. But you're going to have to create a quiz, an empty quiz basically, but has 20 questions that don't actually have any information in them.
Got it. Yeah. Okay.
So it'll save you time from not having to copy and paste each question, because I can do the save and copy, save and copy, save and copy, save and copy, and it'll create all 25 of those questions, but it's kind of blank. But if students are reading over the Word document, they can choose the right letter based on what question number they're on.
Okay. Okay.
It's kind of a weird way to do it, but it's possible.
Yeah, no, I think that's probably the best way to do it. In the chat room, someone said something. Maureen, I don't know what you mean.
So she's talking about like a test generator that can convert your Word document to something Brightspace can handle.
Okay.
So she gave a link to this one here, which it tells you how to paste your questions. And I gave a link to this one here, which has like step-by-step instructions. And if you build your Word document in such a way that has, and I believe you have to put an asterisk in front of the correct answer. So you have to build your Word document in the way that those test generators want it. But then when you paste all of your information there, it can convert it into something that Brightspace can read.
Got it.
So using something like this, it'll tell me that I've done something wrong typically. But if you put it'll tell you how to put the correct answer in, and then it can convert it into something that Brightspace can read.
So it really comes down to what I want to spend my time in. Like, do I want to figure this out, or do I just do the generic test in Brightspace?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Technically, if you decide to do a generic test in Brightspace, you can reuse that kind of empty test for different. You can just keep copying that same test and do different things with it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. This is
You're
really
welcome.
helpful.
Hi, Alyssa. Can you?
Hi.
It's Catherine. Can you go over how I would go about doing a grading of a bonus question? And then my next question was how I grade the written response question.
Yes. So first question is your bonus question an automatically graded question?
Well,
is it a multiple choice true false? Or is it?
That's the thing.
Oh, okay.
I didn't know how to do that. I'd like it to be automatic.
Yeah. So, okay. What type of question is it?
Let's say it's multiple choice. Something like multiple choice.
Okay. Yeah. So back on the property, once you build out your test, back on the properties tab, you see how I have 4 columns here? It's points, different, difficulty, bonus, and mandatory.
Yes.
If I edit the values of that, I can check off, let's say my second question is a bonus question.
Okay.
So when I do that, my test is really going to be only out of 4 points, and they can get, a 5 out of 4, essentially.
Okay, go back to the top and show me what tab you hit to get to this.
I'm on the properties tab. And when I scroll down where the add edit questions are, there's also this edit values.
Okay, great. Edit values. Perfect. All right. And then a written response where I'm grading it later. Can you show it how we do that?
Yes. So I'm going into this other class that I have a written response completed already. So the way that you, and I didn't show people how the scores come in for normal tests. So maybe quickly they'll come to the gradebook, or if you click on grade for a test, I'm going to do one example where it's automatically graded. I can see all of my students, each of my students, their attempts and all their scores. But with the written response, it's going to be, let's say I have 5 questions that are multiple choice and then the other 1 written response, it's going to not give them a point for that written response. So for those quizzes, you would do the same thing. So I've got a written response here. I'm going to click on the drop down and click grade. It's easy. You can do this from the gradebook, grading one at a time, but there's a place that I'm going to show you that you can do it kind of in bulk where you're just looking at that one question over and over. So when you click grade, and Maureen can probably put a link in the chat to this, or we can put it afterwards. Instead of worrying about this page that has each student's attempt on that, I'm going to click on the questions tab. So just like when I'm building the test, there's 3 different tabs. Tabs are everything in Brightspace. So if I click on questions, it's going to let me, I can either grade individual responses or update all attempts. Update all attempts is if I had to, I realized that I made one question wrong and I have to, kind of regrade. But grade individual responses is what I would use for a written response. And then I would choose the question, and usually it's just one that you might have in your test. And I choose that question, and it's going to show me this is the question. This is the student's, this is the student's response. This whole thing was my question. This is my student's response. I wrote myself an answer key to help me compare to their response. So this answer key may or may not be there depending on if you added that when you were building the test, but typically you'll just see their whole paragraph in here. You can give them the score. So I would put that score in here. I click save, and yours would probably say save and continue because I don't have more than one student. And this section up here will let you go to the next student on that specific question and the next student and just grade that specific question. So that's a way in one place you can just grade all of your students that one question instead of having to open every student's attempt, scroll down to where the written response is, and manually grade it.
Okay, can you show us where that tab came in again?
Yes. So go to the quizzes tool.
Okay.
From the quizzes tool, you're going to click on the drop down arrow of the quiz itself, and you're going to choose grade.
Okay.
Then on the grade screen, you're going to choose the questions tab.
Okay, gotcha.
And then you're going to keep it grade individual responses, and you're just going to you'll know it's the written response because it'll be WR. That's written response, and that's how you find the question that you want to grade for each student.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Okay, and you mentioned something, this is my last question, but you mentioned something about copying and pasting from an existing document and using an Excel CSV, I don't know, document program.
Yeah. So Brightspace, if you wanted, I don't recommend the Brightspace option because it's really hard to understand how that Excel file is meant to be set up. But if you have a Word document, it's what I was building in these two examples that we put in the chat. Maureen put one and I put the other. You can paste an exam inside of these other schools have built these test generators that can convert to Brightspace. So if I paste my exam in here and it tells me, I have to read the instructions, it tells me what it needs, but typically it's like I have to put an asterisk in front of the correct answer. And once I do this, I just paste my Word document in here, I can create a quiz and it'll put it in a format that Brightspace can read.
Okay, you're over my pay grade. I don't think this is going to work for me.
Okay.
But thank you. I appreciate it.
I'll continue where I left off. So now that we've created the test, so let me go back into my quizzes. So now the test is created. I've made it available. I want to see what students are going to see. Most of the time, when you're an instructor and you want to see what students can see, you go into view a student. That's not the case with quizzes. So every other thing that you want to see how students see it, you would go this route. But for quizzes, you cannot take a test as a student in student preview. You actually have to stay as an instructor, and you click on the drop down of that quiz, and there's an option to preview it. So this will let you take the test as a student without having to be in student view, because you won't be able to take it as a student in student view. So I'm going to click preview, and it's going to take me to the first screen that students will see. It'll have all the settings. The very first thing I need to make sure is set is that this checkbox is set that says bypass restrictions. That lets you as a teacher bypass any other settings that you have set. For instance, I didn't make this available until tomorrow, but because I'm bypassing the restrictions, I can still start this quiz right now to preview it. If I didn't check that box, my start quiz button would disappear because it's not available until tomorrow. I can see all the other settings I set. So this was the description that I had written, that you'll have 15 minutes to complete this. This is telling me what time I'm starting it. It's telling them what user it is. It's telling them when it's due and when it's available, how much time they get. All of those settings are based on all of this information is based on the settings that you set. Then when you click Start Quiz, you're going to see it exactly how a student experiences it. They have the questions right on one page, or if you decided to show them one question per page, they would see only one question right now, and they can take it. So this second option, I shuffled the question answer. So that's why Toyota is A where it was B before, but I'm going to get this one wrong. And then this must be my written response. So this won't be graded automatically. This is my short answer, and this is my fill-in. I'll get both of those right. I can go back to questions over here. Oh, let me do this pretending that I didn't answer one of the questions. When I go to submit the quiz, students will get a message if they forgot to answer something. So I can go back to that question and make sure that I answer it. Then it's going to give me, like, students will always see a confirmation page, so they'll have to hit submit again. As the instructor right now, because I want to see my results, I'm going to check this box to allow the preview attempt to be graded. That's just for me. Students don't see that. That's just for me so that I can view this again, my preview attempt. And then I'll click submit quiz. And I'm going to see exactly what students see as soon as they submit. They see how much time they took on it, and they see their score. That's the default submission view. If I change that default view to also show them all of the questions I got right and wrong, I would see that on this page as well. So I can click done, or I can click exit preview. If I click done, it's just like what students would see. They'd see their name and the attempt and the score. However, I don't have a score on this because I have a written response that needs to be graded. So then when I click exit preview, I'm not going to show you how to, because that wasn't a real student. That was me just previewing it. That was the experience that you have as students take your test. I'm going to impersonate my student so that I can have a student's response in here so you can see how that looks as well. So you guys can't do this, but I'm just going to, as an admin, I'm going to impersonate my student to take this test just so, okay, start quiz. Actually, I'm just going to try to get everything right. Okay, so now as the instructor, if I go to the gradebook, because I attach it to the gradebook, I'm going to see an icon. So here's that student, here's their submission, here's their score, and I can see anything else I need to see. I can click right on that. That question mark just tells me there's a quiz completed by that student or a quiz started by that student. If I click on that, I can see their full attempt by choosing which attempt I'm looking at, and I can see how they answered everything. Now, one of these, I didn't grade the written response here, so I could grade it right from here and give them the 1 point. because I only have one student. That's probably an easy enough place to do it, versus going to the quizzing tool. But typically, if you're not doing a written response, you don't ever need to click on that because you'll just see the student scores come in. If I click back to the quizzing tool, I can also see these same scores. So if I forgot to connect it to a gradebook, I can still click on the reading quiz, click grade from the dropdown, and I can see a list of all of my students and what their scores were on that test. I'm trying to think if I covered all the things that I wanted to cover there. Oh, okay. Let me check the chat. I did want to talk about copying from one course to another. So there was a question earlier about if I built a test in another class, either a previous semester or even this semester, how do I bring it into this class? You would use copy components for that situation. So you would start in the class that you want to copy into. So in this case, let's say I know I built something last semester in another course, but I want to copy it into this course. I would choose course admin and then import, export, copy components. And on this screen, it's very similar from copying from one course to another. Some of you may already be familiar with that. But if you click for search for offering, and I'm going to sample course 101. I'm going to copy from one of my courses and click add selected. And instead of copy all components, I'm going to choose select components because I just want to copy something specific, just the quiz, from this old course into a new course. So I'm going to click select components, and I'm going to get this error message saying that I've done this before. I've copied from this course before. It's just a warning message so that you don't copy an entire course into another course more than once. But because I'm going to copy a piece, I'm just going to say, yes, I want to continue. And on this screen is where I can choose just the quiz I want to copy. So I would go down to the quizzes section, and there's 16 quizzes. I don't want all of those. So I'm also going to choose select individual items to copy. And then I'll click continue. And it'll let me choose which quiz I want to copy. So in this course, let's say I want to copy over my syllabus sign-off quiz or my practice test. And then when I click continue, it'll allow me to offset dates. If I want to, I can always change the dates once I'm done. So I'm going to click finish. And that'll copy that quiz from that old course into my new course. So once this process is done, I'm going to click back on assessments and quizzes, and I'll see that quiz that I just copied. So now if I go assessments, quizzes, there's the practice test that I copied from that other class. So I'll still have to set up, I'll have to reconnect it to the gradebook and create a grade item for it. I can change the settings if I need to and start an end date, but that's how I would copy from one old course to another. Okay. I think I hit all the questions. If there's anyone else still on the call that has unique questions, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, I will send this recording when we're all done.
That sounds great.
Thanks, Alyssa.
Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Elisa.
Thank you. I'm going to make sure that we indicate that this is an hour-and-a-half training instead of an hour training because there's just too much to cover. Thank you so much for joining.
You too.